Let's begin. I'm Russell Valentino. I'm here to chair this panel on what is Ukrainian about Ukrainian literature. We have three panelists, and then our discussant all here today. I'll introduce you one at a time, and so that I can say a little bit about each one, but it'll be very brief. And if you want to see the whole bio, you need to go to the full list. So our first presentation is by Ol'ga Yablons'ka, who is professor in the Department of Ukrainian Literature at Lesya, Ukrainka, Volyn National University. And she is going to be speaking on Ukrainian Ethnopsychology in the methodology of national literature. Yeah, Ol'ga, the floor is yours.
Спасибі.
Thank you. And good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to express words of gratitude for the ability to join such a profound scientific conference. I'm very grateful to the organizers, to Sarah Phillips, to Svetlana Melnik, to Russell Valentino, as well as, of course, words of gratitude to our interpreters for their work. And the topic was already mentioned. I'll be talking about the Ukrainian ethnopsychology in the methodology of national literature. As early as the folkloristic studies by Mikhailo Maximovich, that's in the preface to the publication Malorosійські Пісні of 1827, as well as in the master's thesis about Osip Bodyansky on folk poetry of Slavic tribes, 1837. There was this idea of the originality of folk art as the expression of the self-identity of the people and their psychological portrait. So this trend was in line with the Romantic era. Friedrich Schilling, in the introduction to the philosophy of mythology, argued that a people become a people not because more or less physically similar individual coexist in space, but because there is a common consciousness. Now, the only direct manifestation of this commonality is the commonality of language. The philosopher considered methodology to be a model of primitive unity. Georg Friedrich Hegel, in his work Philosophy of History, proclaimed the principle of historical development to be the national spirit. The comparative studies by Mykola Kostomarov, the Russian nationalities of 1861, and Volodymyr Antonovich, three national types of folk 1888, laid the foundation for ethnopsychological studies. And according to Ivan Franko, at the end of the 19th century, who in his work Internationalism and Nationalism in Modern Literature published in the newly created Literary and Scientific Bulletin of 1888, he argued that the national identity of each literature is defined by its specific national character, its original features, and the main features of its folk humor and folk pathos, the peculiarity of its expression, literary style, and poetic techniques. Only that writer can be of any importance today who can and know how to say something to the whole educated humanity in those matters that move its soul, and at the same time to portray this word in a form that would best suit its national character. Ethnopsychology, as a science of national character, of spiritual and mental traits of the people, on specifics on mentality, which changes in time, on ethnic stereotypes, it helps to interpret the immanent national features within a literary text. The practical psychologist and literary critic Yakim Yarema, in his work on Ukrainian spirituality in the cultural and historic manifestations of 1937, he relies on the extrovert and introvert types that were identified by Carl Jung. The scientist proves that Ukrainian character has a pronounced introverted type of mental behavior. He believes that Ukraine spirituality is characterized by 4 types of national character, represented by Ivan Vyshinsky, Grigory Skovoroda, Mykola Gogol, and Taras Shevchenko. Now, these are people from different ethnographic and geographic areas, Poltava, Kyiv region, Galician region, representatives of different social strata, a Cossack, a landowner. They lived in different times, 16th and 19th century. The introvert characteristics of the Ukrainian person is manifested in negative perception of the outside world. Let me quote Mykola Yarema. By isolating ourselves, we try to somehow get rid of the unbearable reality. We run away from it on our own or into our own world. We either don't notice it inside or we idealize it. In all these cases, we take a passive stance against it. Now, that psychological factor determines the features of the national character, such features as the desire for isolation, passivity, contemplation, emotionality, egocentrism, and idealization of life that's in folklore. Most of those traits are clearly demonstrated in the biographies of Vyshinsky, Skovoroda, and Gogol. And they were the isolationists, and they were caught by the world, but despite that, they were trying to hid from the world in monastery or abroad, as it was for Mykola Gogol. Now, these are the thoughts by Mr. Yarema. The philosopher and publicist Mykola Shlemkevich, in his work The Lost Ukrainian Man, he distinguishes the following types of Ukrainian men: Gogols, Skovorodas, and Shevchenkos, considering the modern Ukrainian to be a Shevchenko's man. The modern Ukrainian person was born not out of an escape to wealth-fed profit, not out of adaptation to foreign worlds, and not out of an escape to his own spiritual nobility. It was born out of an impulse and motivation to create his own new world from his own sources and from his own strengths. On the banners of that Ukrainian person is inscribed the opposite to 3 slogans: fight and you will overcome.
Формуванні вдачі українця простежив Дмитро Чижевський в статті
The importance of geophysic factors in shaping the character of a Ukrainian was traced by Dmytro Chizhevsky in the 1937 article to the characterology of Ukrainians. This aspect was continued to be explored by Ivan Rybchin separately in the publications The Connection Between the Character of a Ukrainian and the Ukrainian Land, Geophysic Reactions and Character of a Ukrainian. Now about Alexander Kulchitsky. Kulchitsky, using the universal knowledge of a philosopher, psychologist, and sociologist, demonstrated the breadth of ethnopsychology as an interdisciplinary field. A number of the scientist's publications, starting from the 1930s, are devoted to the problems of deep national constants and the Ukrainian mentality in particular. Thus, in the article Soul of the Race as a Totem and Term, Kulchitsky concludes, soul of the race had to cease to be the sum of mental characteristics, but had to become the concept of some integral connection of functional dependencies between a series of physiological and mental manifestations within the psychophysical person. It is especially worth paying attention to the landmark publication of Kulchitsky, The Existential Concept of Life and Ukrainian Spirituality of 1948. Abandonment or alienation of a person, borderline situations, feelings of fear of the world, life sadness, boredom, debauchery, thoughts about death, limits of existence. These are the leading categories of existentialism considered by Kulchitsky. The author of this investigation asks a rhetorical question. If to exist means to enter the borderline situations of life, then what nation would have more data than the Ukrainians to move to the plane of existence? Isn't the life of a Ukrainian, and never was, more than the life of the sons of other nations? A series of borderline situations of chance, struggle, patience, and guilt? Didn't our history develop more like every other in the shadow of the tree of death? The answer is logical and desirable. For the reality of the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian not only in the geographical sense, but also in the metaphysical existential sense of constant exposure to the dangers of the betweenness of existence, for that reality, the existential concept of life would be a magical formula for the transformation of patience and misfortunes on the energy of creativity and heroism. However, borderline situations are truly borderline only when a person is aware of their importance. And because of that, the researcher distinguishes two signs in the Ukrainian worldview: illusionistic Ukrainian optimism and an idyllic approach to life, which are the opposite of the formation of existential experience. Thus, the illusionistic optimism of the Ukrainian, somehow it will be, means to turn a blind eye to the limitations, to the borderline situation of our existence. And the idyllic tendency to close in the difficult, in fact, to close yourself as a canary and a flower on a window shutter or a baby's cradle, makes it immeasurably more difficult to repel existence, although superficial conditions of Ukrainian life push Ukrainian spirituality on the path of existence. Internal structural data do not contribute to this process. In the study geopsychic aspect of the characterology of the Ukrainian man, Kyiv analyzed such components of the problem as the geographical environment that formed the Ukrainian psyche, the influence of historical events on the formation of the Ukrainian person, Ukrainian people in their social and cultural life, etc. In the article The Worldview of a Ukrainian, 1956, Kyiv notes that a socio-psychological aspect reveals the peasant structure of the Ukrainian nation, which determines the tendency to create small and intimate groups of the type communities characterized by sensory closeness based on sympathy, condolence, friendly and mutual understanding. And the cultural morphic aspect of the formation of the Ukrainian psyche presents the peripherality of the geopolitically borderline position of Ukraine as a transition zone between the East and the West. In the formation of the worldview of a Ukrainian, Kyiv distinguishes between the personal Ukrainian unconscious, which gave rise to inferiority complexes, and the collective Ukrainian unconscious, which manifests itself in the archetype of Magna Mater, the good, kind, fertile earth or land of Ukrainian black soil, as our literary work shows it in Stefanik and Kobylyanska works. These and other works of Kyiv became the basis for researching the role of the leading figures of classical Ukrainian literature, as well as the regularities of the history of Ukrainian writing in the light of ethnopsychology. The basis of the scientist's philosophical and psychological concept is the concept of the personality of the Ukrainian person. This moral, ethical and social psychological category also appeared on the basis of understanding the system of Grigory Skovoroda. Skovoroda's ideas of harmony with oneself related work, according to Kyiv observation, relate to the foundations of a person's personalistic morality, his sincerity, authenticity. Kyiv emphasizes that Skovoroda's pre-personalism is fundamentally opposed to Marxist-Leninist criticism. At the same time, the researcher considers Valentin Moroz's and Yevhen Sverstyuk among the 60s as representatives of the Ukrainian resistance. It asked cultural and political resistance, indicating in this way the continuity of the ideas of Skovoroda. In the light of Jung's theory of archetypes, Kulczycki analyzed the uniqueness of Shevchenko's work and its influence on society. That is the article Magic Fighter Martyr on the 150th anniversary of Shevchenko's birth. The researchers singled out such three hypostases of Kobzar as a singer and hero and a martyr, pointing to their trinity in the life and work of the artist. Shevchenko, he writes, is something more for us as the most genius, the greatest poet. For us, Shevchenko is not only a poet who writes poems. Shevchenko is a singer-sorcerer, a magician, soothsayer, like the ancient Greek singer Orpheus, who created worlds and possessed the world with his mesmerizing singing. Shevchenko is a hero like the ancient Greek Prometheus, a hero who fought for the will and right of the Ukrainian people with the sword of his words and the shield of his heart. Shevchenko is also a martyr, a neophyte of Ukrainian truth, who, as the main character of the poem Neophytes, Alcides, sacrificed his long-suffering life himself for Ukrainian truth. And as all peoples of all ages paid tribute to magicians, fighters, heroes, and righteous martyrs, we bow before Shevchenko as before our Orpheus, our Prometheus, and our neophyte Alcides. Our souls bow to Kobzar, the soothsayer, to a hero fighter, righteous martyr. Kulczycki points out that according to Ukrainian beliefs, our singers, let it be the soothsayer Boyan, or Cossack Kobzars, were endowed with magical superhuman power and the ability of clairvoyance. In his opinion, Shevchenko also had such qualities, which is discussed in Paraband poem. The comprehensiveness of Shevchenko lies in the fact that he acknowledges the world of the dead, the living, and the unborn. The poet knows everything and hears everything with his heart, because in his mouth is the word of God, which has a part of a creative God's power, the power to create the worlds of thought, the worlds of the poet's soul. Kulczycki evaluates the prophecies of Shevchenko as Kobzar soothsayer, comparing them with the Old Testament Hosea. Analyzing the aspect of Shevchenko Prometheus, the scientist emphasizes the exceptional coherence of the life and work of Kobzar, who not only celebrated heroism, but also lived as a hero and completed heroic actions, giving an example that there are not only, as in Spanish history, indomitable princes, but also in our country we have indomitable peasants. This is what Kulczycki thinks, turning to the biography of Shevchenko, developing the meaning of the cycle of poems in the Cazemet. The verdict in the case against the Cyril-Methodius brothers did not break the will of the poet. He supports his comrades, and the sentence justifies the complete comparison of the fate of the poet with the fate of Prometheus. The hypostasis of the hero of Prometheus is directly related to martyrdom of the author. Kulczycki traces the thoroughness of martyrdom in the life of Shevchenko. As a conclusion, the scientist concludes with that the spiritual and social authority of Shevchenko is provided by the unity of the hypostases of a singer, a hero, and a martyr. The aspect of Shevchenko father is presented by Kulczycki as an archetype of integrity, as the fullest human potential. In this collective unconscious, Shevchenko's self-realization, wisdom, and exceptionality, and his protective function. Kulczycki analyzes Franko's poem Moses, Moisei, distinguishing the problem of people's relations and leadership. It sounds relevant as the researcher reads the subtext of Moses' speech. The crucifixion of Ukraine on the roads between the North and the South, Asia and Europe, was and is the cross of its historical destiny, but must become a guarantee of its resurrection in the future. The problem of Markian Shashkevich cult as a psychosocial problem was developed by Kulczycki based on critical remarks about Stepan Shach's monograph, Father Markian Shashkevich and the Galician Revival, Paris, Munich, 1961. In his analysis of the social role of the cult of Shashkevich, Kulczycki supports the form of influence of the leader in developed civilized societies, as defined by Sigmund Freud. When some idea is so firmly embodied in that leader that his personal leadership is relegated, so to speak, to second place, yielding the first place to the preaching of an idea, the effect of which, of course, does not cease with the death of the person who was its bearer. It is in these cases that we are dealing in the full sense with guiding spirits, which, as in the case of Markian, did not even have to be spiritual guides in the exact sense of the word during their lifetime.
І підтвердження цієї закономірності є.
So, looking at this thing, we can understand that Markian Shashkevich, the author of the eloquent poem Сучасній, we are talking about the text Безрідний, where the author emphasizes that he does not consider himself to be a man of achievements. And when in the memoirs Mykola Ustiyanovich in 3 years expressed the same opinion, the society assessing Markian Shashkevich did not change their mind. And lots of time was needed to open and show those accents. And fully it is implemented when the artist Ivan Trush will create the portrait of Markian Shashkevich, where the image of a poet will not be correspondent and compliant with the remembrances of a subtle thin man with this tippy nose, but vice versa, it will be a statue of the leader of the nation, a courageous man, how the society created this image at the time. And Kulczycki, in his ideas, emphasizes the following. Markian Shashkevich used to be the prerequisite, the source of this notion, the leader of the nation, and Shevchenko practically implemented it to the full extent. And if you allow me one more minute, the ideas about the Lesya Ukrainka's dramatic poem Boyarinya, the national aspects of which are still relevant. The criteria, thanks to which the researcher considers the text, is the rustiness and obsession. Such social categories as social passiveness as betrayal, and also the for instance, spiritual power as a source of progress, that is obsession. As for the author herself, Kulczycki makes a conclusion that she is an expression of identification with her people and a symbol of Ukrainian obsession. So he makes the conclusion that the ethnopsychology conclusions may be used when we read Ukrainian literature. It's one more tool which helps to read the senses. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We're going to move right along to our second speaker, Maria Zubrytska, who is an associate professor in the Department of Literary Theory and Comparative Studies in the Faculty of Philology at Franko National University of Lviv. And her presentation today is entitled Feeling the Spirit of Space, Symbolic Landscapes and Place Names as Identity Markers in Taras Shevchenko's Poetry. take it away.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Thank you very much, colleagues. I will try to be brief as possible. And let me share my presentation and start the paper. So just no. Sorry. It is so. In my paper, I will focus on landscape, identity, and memory in Taras Shevchenko's Kobzar, on poets feeling the spirit of Ukrainian space and his articulation of Ukrainian territory in textual special representation that still have powerful attraction and are immensely impactful. I will try to answer the question, in what way Shevchenko's poetic space representation shape our understanding of symbolic landscapes as a marker of national identity. In other words, I will try to answer the question, how and why they deepen and strengthen sense of where we are from, and who we are. Symbolic landscapes were chosen as the device for analyzing identity markers. Identity relies on shared symbolic markers. As Smith pointed out, Romanticism transformed territories into poetical landscape and made symbolic landscape important component of special imaginary about nation. As we know, Taras Shevchenko is not only a famous Ukrainian poet, he is as well famous artist, and in his artistic legacy, we have dozens of drawing and painting. We have a beautiful pictures which depicted the places, symbolic places, Ukrainian symbolic places as well. I will try to introduce some of them during my speech. For analysis of Taras Shevchenko's poetic spatial representation and the role of his symbolic landscape in the articulation and construction of collective imagination of national identity, I will focus such key theoretical terms and concepts. Needless to speak that these are following terms from specialist turn series and emotional or affective turn series with their concepts and term. Particularly, I will use identitarian essence of the place, which was proposed by Bertrand Westphal. I will use performative potential of literary representation of place, as Westphal pointed out. I will use as well the third space concept, because the poetry is really the third space between reality and imagination. As well, I will use deep maps and special narratives concept that shift perspective from emphasis of the space to the connotation, association, and meanings that people attach to place. Deep emotions mapping, emotional communities, textual mapping of feelings are very important tool to understand the process of constant interest in Shevchenko poetry, particularly in some of his symbolic landscape pictures. I will use as well imagined community concept and implied readers concept. Let me focus for my analysis. I will focus on two description and the depiction of place in Taras Shevchenko's Kobzar. There are a lot of landscapes description and depiction in Kobzar, but I will focus on two of them because very limited time for my speech, and for analysis I choose to his poetries, particularly poetry about Ukrainian village, and you see Ukrainian translation. I will also use a collection from famous Ukrainian museum just to deeper understanding for foreign readers of Taras Shevchenko poetry. We see Ukrainian text of the poetry, and now I will focus on two English language translation. Just before, I would like to mention that Taras Shevchenko used in Kobzar traditional landscape dictionary, and this dictionary is collected in a famous book, Ukrainian Landscapes of 16th, 17th century, word text dictionary, Українські краєвиди 16-18 століття, слово, текст, словник, but he is making landscapes representation more attractive by altering them and adding ornamental features that deeply rooted into Ukrainian cultural specificity and include a number of symbols and images from folk tales, legends, and myths. And here we have Писанка. Taras Shevchenko used in his Kobzar Писанка and Крашенка. All Ukrainians know what is difference between Писанка and Крашенка. Писанка is Easter eggs decorated by national symbols and signs, and Крашенка is one-colored Easter eggs. During the translation, you see one of the translation, a village in Ukraine, a painted Easter eggs. Just to mention that here you can see писанки from Черкаси region, particularly from Звенигородів, where near Звенигородів Taras Shevchenko was born. And every region in Ukraine has its own specific писанка design, colored, and etc. In English translation, of course.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're only seeing the first slide of your presentation. We're not seeing anything beyond that first one. I wonder if you can...
Just a moment. First slide?
We only see the first one. We can see that there are more, but we just don't see anything beyond that.
You can see, can you see this? Can you see symbolic landscape with Писанка? No? No,
we only see...
I will try to once again to share.
Let's try.
I will try to share once again. Can you see now?
This is the interpreter speaking. Would you please ask Maria to switch to Ukrainian channel in order to be able to listen to the interpreters? She might be able to use the interpretation.
Марія, я бачу
Maria, we can see the title slide, but this is the only thing we can see, only the first slide.
Sorry, I stop sharing. And but it is very important to share my presentation. Okay, I will try to.
Пані Марія, можливо, ви повинні вручну кликати.
Maria, maybe you need to click manually on those slides.
Changing slides.
зараз слайдів взагалі не бачу.
No, we don't see the slides at all now.
Раніше слайд з титлом.
Any slides.
Earlier, we could see the slides.
Just I will. Sorry about that. I don't know actually what is. I will close my presentation. Just a moment, please. Sorry.
Вибачаюсь.
And now,
Перший слайд бачу. Так.
so you can see. Sorry about that. I am so sorry.
Нічого.
I
Ми
am
хотіли бачити. Дякую дуже.
Nothing. It's okay. Nothing. We can see the slides. Oh,
This is Ukrainian text of about Ukrainian vision of Ukrainian село. Село на нашій Україні, неначе писанка село. You can see писанки collection from Ivan Gonchar Museum. And now I will introduce two translations of this text from Kobzar. First of them is followed by Писанки of Черкаси region from Zvenegorod, near Zvenegorodka, place where Тарас Шевченко was born. And in album of Vadim Mitsik, Писанки Черкащини, you can find Писанки of 19th century. From the first half of the century, and you can compare how Писанки looked like in times of when Taras Shevchenko wrote his Kobzar. But anyway, in English text, you have translation of Писанки, and we know that poetry by definition is untranslatable. There is no a perfect, adequate translation, but when we are talking about rootedness in cultural uniqueness and cultural traditions, these non-translation strategies are very visible. The second translation is the same. It is about, so you see difference between Krashenka and Писанка, and Krashenka as one colored Easter egg. In English translation, we lost this peculiarity, this uniqueness, why the village in Ukraine is like Писанка, село на нашій Україні, неначе писанка село. Both translation of Ukrainian countryside area used different landscape vocabulary in order to give a chance for English-speaking reader to see landscape, which they might not otherwise have been able to see, and in order to reach Shevchenko's textual landscape representation in ways which were not previously possible. Shevchenko's comparison of Ukrainian villages with Pysynka, as well as his another comparison, the steppe with steppe vertepe, defy any adequate translation into English. Two landscape representation are deeply rooted into a specific concept in Ukrainian culture. And I would like to move to the whitewash chata or whitewashed homes of Ukrainian. And it should be remarked that Shevchenko's contemporary famous German geographer Johann Georg Kyoll, after his visit to Ukraine in 1838, paid special attention on whitewashed houses in Ukrainian villages. You can see his description, and his description can help you during reading the poetry of Taras Shevchenko, his landscape poetry, why Ukrainian villages with their white-washed houses are like Pysynka. Another poetry on which I would like to focus as example of poetic representation of symbolic landscape, it is his poetry Вечір, or Садок вишневий коло хати, in English translation, a cherry orchards by the house or near the house, to different translation, but I would like to say that in this poetry, place attachment and a sense of belonging play an important role in construction of deep mapping of the feeling of security and sense of community. Shevchenko's poetry could be regarded as poetic narrative of phenomenological experience through language, landscape, memory. To my mind, the best example when readers can see landscapes representation, when they feel that everything is familiar and layered with their personal meaning, are depicted in a cherry orchards by the house. Cherry orchards, as they depicted in many folk songs, is a place of safety. I just would like to explain, this is famous Taras Shevchenko picture, Peasant's Family. You can see peasant family and why cherry orchard is so important for all Ukrainian. Place identity of cherry gardens evokes all markers of deep feelings and emotions, family, bounty, friendship, love. This is a place where families gather for supper, beloved yearn for each other, friends meet to talk. From the very beginning, reading or listening to this landscape representation make our face light up, wake up our fantasy, and invite us to travel to our imagined gardens.
Maria, can you manually advance the slides again? We're not seeing them. Just go down on the left. We see the pisanki. Actually, we see the krashenki right now.
Krashenki.
Yeah.
So sorry. I just actually can you see?
Not yet. No. Can
Not
you
yet.
advance them on the left.
What is something wrong? I will stop and sure. Sorry about that. You
It's
see
okay.
Krashenki?
We're also running a little low on time here, so if you can get to the
Okay,
Yeah.
but maybe I will I would like to, can you see?
Yes, now we can. Feeling
Can
this-
you see now Volodymyr Dibrova? I would like to pay your attention to Volodymyr Dibrova representation of cherry orchards, and unexpected his comparison of this Ukrainian poetry, which became a part of national mythology, that during the Stalin regime, Ukrainian peasants became a target for Stalin because they perceived them as petty bourgeois dream. And Sadok Vishnevi during the Stalin times was regarded as this indestructible petty bourgeois dream. The next landscape is the steppe. The steppe with his plundered grave. The steppe as place of eternity. The place where Ukraine is burned, but it is not die. And in the steppe, in Shevchenko representation, you can see this many layered meaning of what the steppe means for construction of Ukrainian collective memory. Because the steppe is like, I use metaphorically speaking, I use as a valuable portal. When we can interact with the past, with the present, and with the future. And what is important that Shevchenko put focus not on beauty of the steppe, not only on its eternity, not only as a place where the spirit is still light and waiting to be wake up. He believed that оживуть степи. The steppe will come alive again. And it lets me to sum up that landscape representation in Kobzar are positioned as a process of forming and reforming of boundaries between real and fictional places, desired and actual facts. Special representations placing Ukraine with its symbolic landscape and place names are regarded as a model of performative potential of imagined maps that make possible transferring from the real to the imaginary. Poems by Tarasa Shevchenko imagined Ukraine as a distinct nation with unique culture and history. His Kobzar is carved with native, natural, and symbolic landscape, with native atmosphere and native people. It allows me to say that Tarasa Shevchenko's started movement from the text to the mind of the reader and initiated the process of mapping new national feelings and national consciousness, as well as to manifest a representation of the new national life. Thank you very much, and sorry very much about technical problems.
Thank you. That happens. It's happened to all of us at some point. All right, our third presenter is Snizhana Zhygun, and she is an associate professor of the theory of literature at the Borys Grinchenko Kyiv University. Her presentation today is a very clever title, actually, Жіноча, історія, which is rendered as Herstory of the current war in modern Ukrainian literature. Snizhana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Does it move?
It moves.
Super, thanks. I would like to begin with presenting two novels which will help me to answer the question of what is Ukrainian in Herstory in modern Ukrainian literature. The first is Daughter by Tamara Duda, pen name Horiha Zernya, and the second is Behind the Back by Haska Shiyan. Both were published in 2019, and the first became the book of the year according to the BBC, and the author received the highest state literary award, the Shevchenko Prize, in 2022. The second received European Union Prize for Literature, but was sharply criticized in Ukraine. The reason for this success and criticism I will try to outline in my presentation. The main feature of modern Ukrainian women's military discourse in literature is its strong ties with nationalism. These connections are generally characteristic of Ukrainian women's literature, although not without exceptions. These exceptions are in particular works of the 20th century about war, which is highly gendered phenomenon. Western feminist criticism, Anne McClinton, Nira Yuval Davis, John Nagel, tends to view nationalism as entirely masculine. The main function of women in the discourse of nationalism is to care for the reproduction of the nation. Cynthia Inlaw claims that nationalism assigns primary roles to men in times of war. They are defenders of the motherland and women, which in turn have minor and symbolic roles, either the image of the motherland or property. Western feminists, as Nira Yuval Davis observes, repeat Virginia Woolf's remark, "As a woman, I have no country," and often participate in anti-government political movements, in particular anti-war ones. This means protests against the actions of Western countries in the territories of Third World. This tradition led Western feminists to take a similar position regarding the war in Ukraine, particularly after the invasion. However, in colonial countries, the women's movement has a different relationship with nationalism. In these societies, the women's movement combines the goals of women's emancipation with national liberation. That was described by Kumari Jayawardena in the work Feminism and Nationalism in the Third World. Similar specificity of Ukrainian feminism is described by Marta Bohachevska-Khomyak in the work Feminists Despite Themselves, Women in Ukrainian Community Life, 1884-1939. She claims that in the colonized agrarian societies of Eastern Europe, the women's movement correlates its tasks with national building ones, aiming to contribute to the emancipation of the individual the development of the economy, and the modernization of society. Analyzing the activities of women's organizations, she finds that they emphasize the family, which was their favorite symbol of their nation's aspiration, and women in particular for heroic asceticism in the name of independence. In order to occupy a more significant place in society, women relied on recognized social values, family, nation, mother's educational role, philanthropic activities, conscientious work. Their slogan was service to the people. Formation and activity in other circumstances prompt Ukrainian feminists to interpret the war differently than their Western colleagues do. In particular, it is about the sharp criticism of Western pacifism by Ukrainian feminists when Ukrainian women claimed that the supply of weapons to Ukraine is not an abstract ethical issue of supporting militarization, but a matter of life and death. I need this delineation of theoretical differences to highlight the specifics of artistic discourse. Modern Ukrainian women's literature offers as a trend the story of how a woman finds or affirms her national identity under the influence of war. First of all, these are such books as Mariupol Process by Halina Vdovichenko, Because It Hurts by Yevgenia Senik, Eva's Apples by Hristina Kocyra. The most famous among them is the novel Daughter by Tamara Duda. The rapid success of this book hints at how Ukrainian readers lacked an artistic understanding of women's contribution in the resistance to Russian occupation. The main character and narrator is a woman of 30 who lived in Donetsk, painted stained glass windows, and had her own small enterprise. Her story is a story of resistance to hybrid war, and she began to organize in public resistance, continued by supporting the Ukrainian army as a volunteer, and finished as a fighter in the partisan war. The novel describes not a whirlpool, but a germ of events, and I quote, the movement not of birth, but the conception of a new army. And this army was created with the help of those as daughter who was buying for the army everything. The novel very well shows the scale and mechanics of the volunteer movement that began in Ukraine in 1914. Daughter's friends and former employees become a volunteer, partisan, and partly subversive intelligence group. At the beginning of the novel, the narrator warns, if someone dares to stay in an occupied city, she must be prepared for any losses and insults, and the story confirms this. And yet, this is not a witness's story and not a victim's one, but a story of a person who decided to resist. And I quote, I was in an ideal position to wage guerrilla warfare, insignificant and inconspicuous on the outside, but taut and hardy. I knew these yards and streets. I could leave the city by 100 different roads and return just as inconspicuously. I had no husband or children, and what had previously seemed like a personal tragedy was now a market advantage. There is no family, there are no weak points, there is nothing to blackmail me. I am not afraid of technology. I love mechanism and schemes, so surely I will not find an application. The end of the quote. The character breaks the stereotypic image of a woman as the weaker sex because the most important is to have fortitude and the ability to act in difficult and dangerous situations. She rescued a girl who was multiply raped by separatists, helped to escape to familiar women, and took part in the operation to rescue a friend torched by separatists. She had no arms but has grenades, and she is ready to use them in case of unavoidable necessity, which happens at the end of the novel. The character's motivation is to protect her homeland, in particular Donbass, as the land of her ancestors. For her, the fight against the enemy is a personal struggle to be herself, because Ukraine is you. It is the homeland that is the fulcrum in this time of chaos, anarchy, and courage. And I quote, "Let everyone know what it is like to find support in our hour of greatest despair, to grab the air and to rest on the ground, to hear how deep, ancient, buried, and hidden at the level of instinct rises in the blood. What it is like to go up and spirit in hell, being sure that nothing bad will happen to you, because the truth is on your side, because lineage and roots are on your side, because your dead are at your side, and your unborn are also here on your right shoulder." The end of the quote. During the story, readers will not know the name of the character except for the fictional one. And throughout the text, she is called just daughter. This gentle appeal to women younger than the speaker acquires a symbolic meaning in the text. In addition to the sons of the motherland, Ukraine also has daughters, often nameless but determined and effective. Thus, this novel resonates with the Ukrainian tradition of talking about the visibility of women in public life in the context of the national struggle. And Haskashian's novel Behind the Back, which contradicts the Ukrainian tradition of the interaction of feminist and national ideas, appeared in the same year. It received the European UN Literary Prize and criticism of Ukrainian society. Critic Roxana Harchuk characterized it as a novel about a traitor and betrayal, and society tends to perceive this characterization not as an appeal to the events of the novel, in which the character cheats on her boyfriend, but more broadly, the character's lifestyle during the war is perceived as betrayal. However, critics also noted the connection of the novel with the ideas of Western feminism, seeing in it a protest against male practices of nationalism and an attempt to give a voice to those who are not taken into account. According to the plot, Marta, an HR who works in an IT company in Lviv, tries to cope with the forced separation from her lover, who did not escape mobilization, but after some time, she betrays him. At first glance, Marta is a character inspired by the ideas of Western feminists. She believes that her boyfriend did not avoid mobilization in order to prove his masculinity to everyone, and the war is a way to exercise men's rights. The war in the novel appears at some distant place for the competition of men, where the losers are eliminated forever. And in Marta's understanding, the participation in the war is a whimsical and senseless choice of men. The character and the author do not want to understand the war as an indiscriminately cruel experience and describe it as it looks from far place. Despite the fact that the author depicts a fairly wide range of characters, the voice of those who experienced the real war is not heard there. Marta doesn't feel a sense of community with her affected fellow citizens and does not long for other communities. She is uncomfortable in the volunteer team which a colleague involves her. She does not appreciate the volunteer movement, although despite her considerable wealth, which is emphasized in every way, her boyfriend's equipment is bought by money by this volunteer. The main concern of the character is her body and its needs. the satisfaction of which was prevented by mobilization. It is difficult to say where the couple had anything in common apart from the bed, but female sexuality becomes a much more important theme of the novel than war. Positioning the novel as feministic is complicated by powerful consumerism, which is the basis of the character. Marta tries with all her might to distance herself from the responsibilities imposed on people by the war, childishly believing that life under any circumstances is consumption and pleasure. So the development of real events convinced us that responsibility is a necessary quality for everyone, regardless of status or gender. And in the conditions of war, the national tradition of pragmatic feminism, as Marta Bohachevska-Khomyak called it, effectively organizes the community to protect the basic needs of all its representatives. Novels of recent years offer different plots embodying this responsibility, both to contemporaries and to ancestors, emphasizing the issue of national identity. Obviously, later novels will problematize pragmatic feminism and offer new female images. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I have books to add to my list now.
Thank you.
We have the privilege of having Tamara Hundrova as our discussant. I'm going to give us a little extra time on this in this panel because we lost a little bit in the middle. So we'll go until 1:30, and then take maybe 5 minutes before the final panel of the day. Sarah and I. So Tamara Hundrova probably doesn't need an introduction here, but I'm just going to say that she is a longtime professor and head of the Theory of Literature Department at the Institute of Literature at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, professor and dean at the Ukrainian Free University, and then currently a visiting research scholar and lecturer in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures at Princeton University. Please take the floor. Tamara, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm very glad to be here with you and to participate in this wonderful conference and to serve a discussant in this session. And first of all, I would like to also to thank the participants who presented very interesting papers today, because I haven't a chance to familiarize myself with them earlier, so it's much easier to speak about the presentations. To my mind, I would like to say, it seems to me that all three presentations can be united or maybe connected by one of the many important and very interesting topic. I mean the subject of that has connection to national identification and nationalism. And it seems to me it is very important. We see, for instance, that in Snizhana Zhygun's paper, she considered it in connection with the depiction of women in war, and especially that are represented in the text written also by women, the authors. And Maria Zubrytska spoke about the symbolic meaning of landscape in the poetry by Tarasa Shevchenka, which is very, very interesting because it's a kind of creation of some kind of a memorial map, and that help us to imagine this imagine national community as well. And Ol'ga Yablons'ka this is directly connected with the idea of development of Ukrainian ethnopsychology and, of course, with the question of national ideology and in connection and culture and literature and scholar in connection to this aspect. I would say that this idea, actually, a national idea or nationalism is not I would say not methodological frame of this of all presentation, but maybe a kind of ideological framework on of them. And speaking about this aspect, it seems to be we have so large amplitude of understanding of the very nationalism. I just look at the Wikipedia, Ukrainian Wikipedia especially, and they have 17 and more that was not discovered definition and kind and types of nationalism in contemporary world, and the understanding is very different. So it seems to me that at least it seems to me that it would be maybe useful to have a kind of description or some understanding of the very nationalism in each of case. For instance, when it is the presentation is concerned a kind of romantic nationalism or ethnic nationalism, as it is connected with an idea of organic nationalism, like organic consequences of the unity, where such factors like language, mythology, ethnicity, culture, religions play substantial role. Or it is a liberal or cultural or civic understanding of nationalism with this constructivist idea and constructivist approach that connect the national development and national idea with the idea of modernization and the political activity, and also a kind of project of creating some kind of project of national imaginary imaginary community as well. So it seems to me it's maybe the main frame of today's presentation. And going to each of them, I start with Snizhana Zhygun. I start my comments in opposite order. And then I finish with my comment on the presentation by Ol'ga Yablons'ka. Snizhana Zhygun is a very interesting, very topical subject. It's about the Herstory of the current war in Ukrainian literature that is written by women authors and about the women in the war. And also this text, this novels were written before 21st of February 2022. But it also speak about the war, and it seems to me very interesting because they maybe can be considered like a background of our contemporary understanding and our contemporary approach to this situation that we have today. So it seems to me very interesting. I like very much that in particular one of the idea of Samuel Heinz, that nation in war is a nation of men, serve like a frame of further discussion for Snizhana Zhygun, and the presentation actually move to show this kind of representation of war in a female optic or through the female eyes. So of course it is absolutely natural, and it is obvious that that we can speak about the difference of feminist discourse in formerly colonized countries, or as Snizhana Zhygun refers to a kind of Western feminism. It is a very general notion, I would say. So she points to the specifics of feminist discourse in former colonized countries, and especially as well in Ukrainian. And she also mentioned Marta Bachevska's point that participating in the national movement, Ukrainian feminists, I quote, relied on recognized social values, and especially the family and the nation. So, and to my mind, this kind not so simple interconnection of nationalism and feminism can be the main idea that Snizhana tried to discuss in her presentation. We have two novels, one Dotsya by Tamara Горіха-Zerня and За спиною by Haska Shiyan, that were written, as I told before, the contemporary invasion, Russian invasion to Ukraine, and they represent in some way different women's reactions to war. Especially Snizhana outlines and emphasize that in some ways they're contrasting. They give us a different understanding, different conception of this topic. The novel Dotsya shows, as it is argued in the paper, that first, this story is not about a witness on a victim, but about a person who decided to resist. That is, Dotsya is a volunteer, a fighter. And the second position, the second thought is that I quote, the novel resonates with the Ukrainian tradition of talking about the visibility of women in public life in the context of the national struggle. So I would like to maybe to start a little to speak a little more about this, because it seems to me we can have rather the novels where they consider this topic from the different point of view, but nevertheless I did not. I would not to see them like absolutely opposites. Snizhana, especially Snizhana, says that this is affectionate address to women younger than the speaker takes on a symbolic meaning in the text, and mean that in addition to the son of the motherland, it also has daughters, often nameless but determined and effective. And in my opinion, the situation is more complicated because actually we really don't know the name of this heroine, of this character, who is called Dotsya. And many other characters they address to her like a Dotsya. So to my mind, it is also on the contrary. Maybe it symbolizes exactly the invisibility of women in war, demonstrating an implicit also justification of a kind of patriarchal view, since as we know, not only in Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian culture and history, but around the world, and it is in very strong traditions that usually the women who remained nameless in history and in culture. So this is one of my questions. So can we also see this naming like I'm sorry, I'm sorry, like an illustration of a kind of this invisibility of women that depicted in this, and especially in this text. And we also have this character that is very interesting, character of Dotya, who it seems to me the whole stories eventually takes on the character of a fairy tales, because so easy the daughter avoided the danger that of course we can see very often in this she meets in this stories, and her all stories are in some way so easily solving, I would say. So it is also very interesting that this character, as it is depicted in the novel, is constantly associated with a kind of borderless woman, or constantly emphasizes her not body, her reality, but like an elf or something like. She is a weak, she is a very I would say transparent person. So it seems to me as a contrast, we can see contrast character in Haskashiyan's novel, where she, on the contrary, affirms the corporeality or body of women and her materiality. And this is one of the main idea of the text. This is a novel about a woman not at war, and it is emphasized that the novel was written in 2019, but depict consciously a kind of detachment of women from the war in order to problematize her existential and corporeal being as a woman. The main concern of the heroine is her body and its needs. That how is Snizhana Zhygun emphasized in her position. But it seems to me the body in particular, the Marta, and with her interest in body and her representation like a real person is, and body and her body is one of the attributes as of being, of the essence of beingness, of woman beingness, I would say. So Haskashiyan is some way made in kind of reversion, and she made men as a war heroes, but problematize this question as well. But of course now in contemporary situation we have so many women who became a fighter and who participate and who are now in the war and who are on the front line as well, among them many Ukrainian authors as well, male and females. So and we have many new texts about wars that written and different authors, especially in poetry, for instance, but also oral history as well as an essayist. So we can, this question is open for the further discussions, and it seems to me it is very important to look how this women's character are represented in contemporary time, in contemporary literature. So in nowadays text that we, of course, we already have. The second paper, Symbolic Landscape as Identity Markers in Tarasa Shevchenko's poetry by Maria Zubrytska, is very interesting, it seems to me, because it is dealing with a phenomenological reading of landscape and its symbolic meaning in Shevchenko's poetry, and especially in some way to emphasize this constructivist role of Shevchenko in the projection of imaginary community. And it seems to me it is very, very important, because now it seems to me the question and the idea of Shevchenko's like a poet and the author and his empathy that is inscribed in his text, and also influence this very strong emotional and cognitive also and effect is very important, and it seems to me this paper is dealing exactly with this topic. The attempt to place and map Ukraine through the representation and a performative role of the special imaginary is particularly interesting, it seems to me, in terms of cultural national identification. And especially, it's also interesting because we have, Maria Zubrytska also discussed the question of translation, how it can be translated, how it can be bring to or transfer to into the other language, into the other cognitive map, for instance, of different imagined community of for different people, for instance, and so on. This is a very interesting question. It seems to me it's worth of further investigation. It seems to me also very important the other aspect that also Maria Zubrytska touched a little bit. This is the question of transfers, of how imaginative map or imaginative mapping of symbolic landscape in Shevchenko's poetry can be transferred, can be reproduced in for instance, in not only in poetry but also in painting, because we know that Shevchenko was also a famous and very interesting painter. And for instance, we have Katerina, who in three variants, Katerina like a poem, Katerina like stories, Katerina a painting, Shevchenko also has. So, and of course, we have a different mapping this symbolic landscape, and it seems to me it is also very important to maybe to use or to introduce an intermediate aspect also to such kind of study. When we are talking about performative potential of literal representation of place and this ability to infect the social production that Maria Zubrytska emphasizes, I would like to ask maybe the question of I wonder about a kind of how such performative projection that Shevchenko, we have Shevchenko's poetry has impacted the social cultural I would say programming or perception of Ukraine for Ukrainians themselves also, and for foreign reader as well. And it concerns not only literature, because of course in literature we can mention Levitsky, for instance, or many other Ukrainian writers who also, for whom the Ukrainian landscape, the symbolic meaning of Ukrainian landscape play a very significant role. So it's a kind of codification of national identity, I would say, an imaginative mapping of this identity. But also, I mean, in a man, in mental map, for instance, in mass media as well, and in which way the reader can construct or deconstruct this spatial reality. And it seems to be also this relation with painting, for instance, is very important, because I don't remember his name, but one of the Ukrainian painter who paint Shevchenko from the different landscapes. So his idea, his style, a special style, is connected with this kind of painting. Ol'ga Yablons'ka, I switched to Ukrainian because it seems to me maybe it will be easier to understand. Ol'ga Yablons'ka
Ol'ga Yablons'ka in her speech shows a very broad time dimension, and she looks vastly at the development of this peculiar type of ethnopsychological research, which can be associated, obviously, with some spiritual, psychological, or to some extent, cultural, civilizational, starting with Maximovich and Kostomarov, Shlemkevich, up to Kulchitsky, and really, it's an impressive line, even out of those separate remarks. which were mentioned, we can imagine that this is the whole tradition like this. We are speaking about an attempt to define mental, psychosocial types of Ukrainians and to characterize their nature. On the one hand, it resembles, at least for me, for a very influential, innovative psychology of Wilhelm Wundt peoples. Raising these questions about the psychology of the peoples, it was done as more of psychological one. But on the other hand, it's obvious that we should mention the romantic philosophy, Zeitgeist, the spirit of the people, Herder, people's creativity, literature, culture, and so on. I felt this lack in the speech of the understanding of how the modern science, modern psychology, ethnopsychology understands this sphere which was mentioned in the speech. Which type, which school, I would say, can, in fact, this sphere belong and this methodology can belong. And in the same way, the speech mentioned some of the notions which have methodological significance, like the issue of existentialism and personalistic idea of personalism in the cultural researches. You also mentioned about the article of race and nation that is incredibly interesting, at least out of the quote which you took. I could understand that it was an attempt to get away from the biological, anthropological interpretation to the functional, to the cultural functional understanding of the race. But still, it seems to me that these quotes which were mentioned would need more comments to understand the context and the perspective to describe all of those directions. I would like to express my gratitude to all of the participants, and I think that all of these speeches were really, to some extent, they were combined, characterizing Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian humanitarian studies, and on the other hand, describing some new directions for the development and researchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. I am afraid we don't have time for
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, we didn't give you very much time either. So I will encourage you, the panelists, to communicate directly if you would like to respond to any of Tamara's questions or comments, because we are right up against our next panel, and I want to give people a chance to go away if they need to use the restroom or wash their face. Let's say 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and start the very last panel of the day. Okay, thank you very much to all our panelists for this stimulating conversation. Sorry we don't have more time to talk. I did enjoy your papers and look forward to interacting more about your topics in the future. Thanks.
So welcome back, everyone.